Good morning. Good morning, colleagues. Sanmalan Injani. My name is Paman Damtongo. It's a DDP Democracy Development Program, and I'd like to welcome you to today's engagement that we're having in partnership with the IJR via the Afrobarometer. Fourth, the Afrobarometer will be introduced by our colleague Preston, as well as other colleagues. Our speakers have started speaking already. So if they could offer me the chance, just do the normal stuff that we do in the proceedings, so that you'll get a chance. I promise you, at least 35 minutes on the program is dedicated to you. But other than that, welcome, colleagues, and of course, we're very excited to be hosting this engagement in partnership with our colleagues from Cape Town, and of course, some of them being based in Johannesburg and across the continent. This survey and other surveys are important data points for organizations like ours who do civic and democracy education. And so when we assess people's perceptions about either the state of governance and the state of politics and generally the state of public participation, it's an important area to start off with when we engage in communities in particular. And so I hope that you'll take this conversation in that vein. There will be opportunity for you to engage directly with the Afrobarometer, the presenters, as well as the speakers that we have available for you. Of course, I won't introduce the speakers at this juncture. I'm sure you saw them in your invitation. But other than that, we'd like to welcome you to just be at ease. And of course, let me invite President Govindasamy from the Afrobarometer survey, and we'll engage thereafter. Am I? Sorry. Yes, please put your phones on vibrate. I do hear some feedback, but I think it might be our streaming platform as well. In case someone had RSVP'd or had not RSVP'd and they wanted to be here, please make sure that they know that we're streaming this engagement, even though it's an Afrobarometer engagement. We were lucky enough for them to say, guys, you're welcome to stream it on your platform. They're not precious about that thing. Just like Mbali is not precious about the spelling of a signing on the program that we have for you today. So we do apologize for that. But of course, I know some of you didn't even see it, but now I've drawn your attention to it. Don't make it a big issue, guys. Thank you very much. Round of applause for Preston, please.
Very good morning, colleagues, partners, and friends. I think it's fitting for me to just give a special thanks to Marshall and Brian and Paul. Sorry, both of us. Yeah. One in the same. Paul and Marshall, thank you so much for hosting us, and DPP, thank you so much for hosting this event. We really appreciate the relationship and partnership we have to engage with our data on a grassroots level, so to speak. And so it's a real privilege this morning, colleagues, to welcome to you this round 10 of Disseminations for Afrobarometer survey in South Africa, a platform where data meets dialogue and where citizens' voices meet those who shape policy and action. For more than a quarter of a century, Afrobarometer has remained one of the continent's most trusted and enduring sources of rigorous, independent, and comparable data on how Africans experience democracy, governance, and everyday life. Across 10 rounds and more than 45 countries, our methodology has evolved to meet the highest international standards. Nationally representative samples, face-to-face interviews conducted in the respondents' preferred language of choice, and transparent data that anyone can access and analyze. I think this is one of our core foundations, that Afrobarometer, even though it meets international standards and international rigor, it is a public good, and it is available for public consumption purely because we want to elevate and leverage the voices of ordinary South Africans in this case. The survey we discussed today was conducted between June and July of 2025 in South Africa, a critical period immediately following the general elections and the formation of the GNU. It captures a nation reflecting deeply on renewal, inclusion, and the effectiveness of collective governance at a moment where public expectations are high, but patience is running thin. Yet, as we know, no single data set can claim to tell the whole story. Evidence-based decision-making depends on the convergence of multiple sources, from administrative records to policy evaluations to civil society monitoring and citizens' perception surveys. Afrobarometer here represents one powerful piece in this larger data ecosystem, anchoring that ecosystem in the voices and experiences of ordinary people. For those in civil society, this data equips us to advocate more effectively, to hold power accountable, to shape constructive policy debates, and to elevate the concerns of communities often unheard. And for those in government and policymaking, it offers a mirror. It's an opportunity to engage with the public's perception honestly and translates to insights into responsive actions. So this morning you'll hear from my colleague Asifika Ifako, and thereafter you'll hear from Mbali and Nonguruleko, as well as Betembe. And so I hope this morning we can have some fruitful discussions around what the data says about ordinary South African citizens' perception of this country, how democracy works, how the GNU is functioning, trust in institutions, and maybe some insights into a way forward. So that I thank you all for your attendance, and we're looking forward to some fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Preston. Preston is a Durban boy, all the way from Hillcrest. He was part of the capital flight from the CBD. Sorry. You were saying it's an important data set as well, echoing some of the things that I said in the beginning, but also we have in the room Ms. Ashley Warfield from the US Consulate. So for those of you who are prone to conspiracies, the CIA is also in the room. No, I'm joking. But welcome, Ashley. So first, can you welcome, please, our Executive Director at the Democracy Development Program, Dr. Paul Kariuki, so that we can enable you to relax and enjoy the space. And he is hosting us on behalf of the Afrobarometer at this gathering. A round of applause for him.
Well, good morning, colleagues. I'm grateful that you made time to come and be with us today. My colleagues have already said it all while we're here. And mine is just to say that we are thankful for this ongoing partnership between Afrobarometer and DDP. We believe the power of the data in helping us to ground our conversations to something that we can be able to relate and be able to question and see where the trends are and what we need to learn from those trends to inform our advocacy efforts. And for DDP, partnerships and collaborations are our currency. And so this is a testament of a 20-year-old organizational or institutional relationship that has been ongoing, and we're always privileged to have you guys back here. I've already booked them for next year, so it's going to happen again, and they will move things to make it happen. And so we're grateful. For the first time, we were able to host a political summit at University of Pretoria with Asafrika as our guest there, and we're going to do it again. And I'm looking forward to that. So we're trying to create opportunities not only just to collaborate institutionally, but to bring data to inform our conversations, so that we are not talking out of something that we normally cannot be able to, put our habit where it really matters most. I was taught many years ago when I was still doing my university training that data doesn't lie, and I think it's still true, isn't it? Unless it's cooked. So the privilege we have today, our partners in DDP, from DDP, is that we have an opportunity to interrogate some of these insights. And I was telling my colleagues also next year, we'll probably look at the same data, but aggregated per province, so that we also see what's happening in KZN. Today, we're talking about national level conversation, but I hope we can also relate to some of the contextual issues that we are battling with here in KZN. and hopefully we can be able to take up some insights that can inform our work for next year. So on behalf of my winning team at DDP, and first of all to thank Brian for making this happen. He worked so hard to get our colleagues here. We can give him a round of applause. Yes. He's very supportive because as much as I would like to do everything, I cannot be able to do it. So when I have a colleague like him, I really do appreciate it. And he knows that I do that. And I appreciate that very much. But also for you for accepting the invitation. We just had a local government conference last week. I was not so sure what would come because we put pressure on your timetables. But thank you for coming. And of course, for African Preston, for seeing this value in this relationship and continue to invest in it. I really do appreciate it. Please take our gratitude to Prof. What's the name there? Hendricks, yes. And colleagues, every time I think about Adia, comes in the morning. Stan and Yasha.
Yeah.
Don't remember the CEO. But hopefully one day we'll have a year of DDP at some stage. And lastly, please enjoy our hospitality, network, and make the most of your time together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, the reason why we're all gathered here today, what does the data say? What does the findings say from the Afrobarometer, citizens' perception of democracy and effectiveness of the GNU? This will be presented by West African Partner, the publications manager. I think, I don't know, but Afrobarometer, it's there, but it's not on the program. I was just going to say that they are not very precious about titles as well. So we do welcome Mother Bigger, and of course, I'm not going to make the joke that I always do when I introduce you. So welcome. So welcome. We're really happy to have you. A round of applause for our people.
Good day, colleagues. I'm very delighted to be here with you today in sunny Durban, and I'm sure that it goes for Preston. Well, Preston lives here, but he's happy to be here to talk about these very important findings. Today, we'll be looking specifically at citizens' perceptions of democracy and the effectiveness of the GNU. So at a glance, this is what the findings show. 1, fewer than half of South Africans support democracy. 2, 7 in 10 are dissatisfied with the way the democracy works in South Africa. 3, unemployment tops the list of citizens' priorities. And 4, views on the GNU's effectiveness at solving the country's most important problems are mixed. So before we go any further, for the benefit of those of you in the audience who may be unfamiliar with Afrobarometer, I'll start by just answering the question, what is Afrobarometer? So Afrobarometer is a Pan-African non-partisan survey research organization that provides reliable data on African experiences and evaluations of democracy, governance, and quality of life. And why do we do the work that we do? Preston spoke about this earlier, and that is to give African publics a voice in policy and decision-making across the continent. To date, we have completed 10 survey rounds in up to 45 countries since the year 1999. And next year, the year 2026, we will be launching our 11th round of surveys. This map shows you where Afrobarometer conducts its work. So you'll see that the countries shaded in red were the first countries to go into field between the years 1999 and 2001. And these countries include South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Lesotho and Malawi in Southern Africa. And then in East Africa, we have Uganda and Tanzania. In the West, we have Ghana, Nigeria, and Mali. Chad, shaded in green, is our latest additions. You'll see that the countries shaded in gray, we have not yet surveyed, and that is mainly due to political instability in those regions. Now let's talk a bit about our methodology. We use nationally representative samples of adult citizens. So we survey those who are aged 18 and above. We conduct our interviews face-to-face and in the language of the respondent's choice. We also use a standard questionnaire that allows us to compare across countries and over time. And the Afrobarometer team in South Africa, led by the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, interviewed 1,600 adult South Africans between the 28th of June and the 19th of July this year. And a sample size of 1,600 yields country-level results with the margin of sampling error of plus minus 2.5 percentage points at a 95% confidence level. So these are our survey demographics. That's the breakdown by age, by gender, by residence, and by education. So I'll give you a second just to look at that slide. And then we'll move on to talk about citizens' views of democracy, of party political competition, and of political freedoms. So what are the key findings in this area? One, we find that although a growing number of South Africans prefer democracy to any other form of government, the share still remains below half. About 6 in 10 citizens support elections as the best way to choose their leaders and say many political parties are needed so that South Africans have real choices in who governs them. 3, nearly 2/3 of South Africans say citizens should be able to join any political organization they want. 4, more than 7 in 10 say that the media should be free to publish any views or ideas without government control. And 5, the share of respondents who support military rule has spiked since 2022. And this is perhaps our most striking finding. Only about 4 in 10, by contrast, are opposed to a military intervention. So let's look specifically at support for democracy. Here we find that between the years 2011 and 2025, the share of respondents who say democracy is preferable to any other kind of government has dropped significantly. So if you look at the slide, you see that fewer than half, that is 49%, of South Africans say democracy is preferable to any other form of government. Although the share who support democracy, as you can see, is up from the lowest recorded level in 2021, which was 40%. Support for democracy increases with age, ranging from 42% among the youth, so those aged 18 to 35, to 64% among the elderly, those aged 56 years and above. But it decreases with education, ranging from 58% among those with either primary or no formal education, to 47 to 48% among those with either secondary education or a post-secondary education. 2/5, that is 41% of unemployed citizens support democracy, and that is compared to narrow majorities of full-time workers at 53%, part-time workers also at 53%, and adults who are neither working nor looking for a job at 52%. And here, men are also somewhat more likely than women to support democracy. So that is 51% of men versus 46% of women. Now let's look at choosing leaders through elections. The share of respondents who believe that elections are the best way to choose their leaders has also dropped since 2011 by 14 percentage points, from 75% to 61%, although the idea that South Africans should choose their leaders through elections, as you can see, is still a majority view. By contrast, though, 4 in 10, that is 39%, say that the country's leaders should be chosen through other methods. Support for choosing leaders through elections increases with education, ranging from 51% among those with primary or no formal education to 72% among those with post-secondary education, but it decreases with citizens' experience of lived poverty, ranging from 86% among the wealthiest citizens to 44%, and between 44 and 52% among the poor. And women are also more likely than men to support choosing leaders through elections. The share of South Africans who say many political parties are needed to ensure that South Africans have real choices in who governs them has dropped since 2011 as well by 13 percentage points, from 71% to 58%. But again, it is still a majority view. On the other hand, since 2022 in particular, we find that the proportion of citizens who say political parties are divisive and we do not need many of them has increased by 11 percentage points, from 29% to 40%. And in 2025, as you can see, fully 4 in 10 citizens, that is 40%, say political parties are divisive, and we don't need many of them. And support for multi-party systems increases with education, from 36% among citizens with primary or no formal education to 68% among those with a post-secondary education. Support for a multi-party system is also more common among better off respondents compared to their less well off counterparts. It's also more common among younger respondents, those who are employed full-time and urbanized. Now let's turn to our most striking finding on military rule. And here we see that the share of South Africans who support military rule has spiked from 28%, in 2022 to 49% in 2025. And that is an increase of 21 percentage points. Only about 4 in 10, that is 42%, are opposed to a military takeover. On freedom of association, nearly 2/3, that's 64% of citizens say people should be able to join any political organization they want. And that's a drop of 7 percentage points compared to 2022. By contrast, about 3 in 10, that's 32%, say government should be able to ban organizations. On media freedom, support for media freedom has been climbing steadily since 2018, as you can see from the graph. In 2025, 72% of South Africans think the media should be free to publish without government control. And only about a quarter, that is 26%, instead believe that their government should have the freedom to ban publications it disapproves of. Let's turn now to assessments of democracy, of national challenges, and the GNU's effectiveness. So the key findings here are as follows. 1, 2/3 of respondents believe South Africa is not a democracy or a democracy with major problems. 2, 7 in 10 citizens are dissatisfied with the way that democracy works in South Africa. And this is compared to half who expressed dissatisfaction in 2015, so a decade ago. The leading concern among South Africans is unemployment. I'm sure that comes as no surprise, cited by 55% as one of their top 3 priorities requiring government intervention. Other priorities include crime and security, water supply, infrastructure and roads, and corruption. Again, I'm sure those come as no surprise. Majorities of citizens rate the government's performance in addressing these problems as poor. And lastly, 4 in 10 South Africans say the government of national unity has been effective at solving the country's most pressing problems, but a similar proportion disagrees. So let's look at what South Africans say about the extent of democracy. Here we find that the share of South Africans who see the country as either not a democracy or a democracy with major problems has been increasing gradually over the last decade. And it has climbed by 18 percentage points from 2015, sitting at 68% in 2025. We also asked South Africans about their satisfaction with democracy. And here we see that fully 7 in 10, that is 70% of South Africans, say that they are dissatisfied with the way that democracy works in this country. And that figure is up from 50% in 2015. By contrast, only about 3 in 10, that is 29% of South Africans, say that they are either fairly satisfied or very satisfied with the way that democracy works in this country. And we find that dissatisfaction with democracy is highest among the poor at 79% of those experiencing high lived poverty. It's also highest among middle-aged respondents, so 77% of those aged 36 to 55 years of age, and it is also highest among job seekers at 76%. What are the country's most important problems requiring urgent government interventions? South Africans see unemployment as the country's biggest problem, cited by 55% of respondents as one of 3 priorities for government action. Other problems include crime and security, water supply, infrastructure and roads, and corruption, which round up the top 5 of problems. In 6th place is electricity, 7th place housing, and 8th place is health, and 9th place education. And how is government faring in solving South Africa's most important problem? Well, majorities of South Africans say their government is performing fairly badly or very badly on a range of metrics, including more than 9 in 10 of South Africans who say that their government is performing poorly in job creation, in narrowing income gaps, in fighting corruption, in reducing crime, and improving the living standards of the poor. Four in 10 of South Africans, that is 40%, say the government of national unity, or the Grand Coalition, as others like to call it, has been effective at solving the country's most pressing problems. But a similar proportion, that is 38%, disagrees. And nearly 6 in 10 citizens, that is 58%, say that citizens must be able to hold government accountable, even if decisions are made more slowly. While 40% of South Africans instead believe that it is more important to have a government that gets things done, even without citizens' influence. So in conclusion, this is what the findings tell us. Fewer than half of South Africans support democracy. 2/3 of citizens believe South Africa is either not a democracy or a democracy with major problems. 7 in 10 citizens are dissatisfied with the way that democracy works in South Africa. The share of respondents who support military rule has spiked from 28% in 2022 to 49% in 2025. The foremost concern among South Africans is unemployment, followed by crime and security, water and sanitation, infrastructure, roads, and corruption. And majorities of citizens rate the government poorly in addressing a range of important problems. And asked whether the GNU is effective at solving the country's most pressing problems, South Africans are divided. I'll leave it there, and we look forward to a robust discussion towards the end of the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I don't know if people are not clapping because they also responded about the It is scary. It is scary. I know we started a bit late, but according to the program, we're meant to be getting tea. So can I ask you 5 minutes? There's chow, there's food on the other side that they've lovingly prepared for us. So I'd ask you to digest some of the insights from the survey. Just grab something to eat, come back and sit down, and then we'll set up the stage for the panel discussion and some engagement directly with the survey itself. Is that all right? Thank you very much. Just grab some tea, come back. We'll give you about 5 minutes for that, please. Ja, kan du också vara lilla?
For sure.
Background information. Was what is it?
Yes, that's fine. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but it's national representative, right? So how it works is we'll take the proportion of this in the country or something. Yeah. So one thing so much fun. It's a mix. It's flexible.
I think some people kind of over. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but but I don't think I'm really quite worried about that. So many typical things happen. So.
Now, these are all of the It's
Someone
on.
wants to make.
Just.
Maybe.
How about you? I think I'm very good. So this is like- I think I'm good. Whether photographer even makes sense, like your face, not taking that light.
See that happen?
Yeah. You know, it's like.
Yeah.
You know.
All right, colleagues, good morning once more. Thank you very much for being compliant on the back and forth between tea and now. I was told now, I didn't know. I thought tea was the only thing being fed today. But luckily our colleagues from Afrobarometer recognized the state of the economy. Lunch will be served after today's proceedings, just so you're aware, and that you also have some more time for networking after the engagement, that you don't have to rush off when you're done. Of course, I'd like to invite now our panel to respond directly to the presentation that we got from Asafiga, which reflected the outcomes of the survey, round 10 of the survey from Afrobarometer. Of course, it is South Africa based specifically for this round. And of course, that's the context under which we'll be engaging. The three respondents that we have today have very significant bios, CVs, and accomplishments. And so I hope that they will respect that I can't go through all of that. Otherwise, we'll be here. It's 10:56 now, probably be done introducing them at 12:05. So I'd just like to introduce them by their current titles. And perhaps a bit of former titles, just in brief, to let you guys know who they are. Firstly, I'd like to introduce someone who is not a stranger to the Democracy Development Program, and of course has become also a friend to Asafiga through me. Ms. Mbali, who is the Executive Director and founder of the Groundwork Collective. Formerly, you might know her from her life in politics as a member of Provincial Parliament for the case of legislature. A round of applause to her, please. I'd now also like to introduce Zane, UK Student Lecturer for the School of Built Environment and Development Studies. He's an Andrew Mellon Early Career Scholars Fellow. He's a visiting fellow for the Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. And of course, he is also a recurring feature in DDP engagements, Dr. Metembe Mzalose. Some of you might know him as Trust. A round of applause for him, please. And then finally, I would say a son of the soil, but I guess this time it's daughter of the soil. Mrs. Nonkululeko Hlongwane Mhlobo, who is the Executive Director, I don't know, thank you very much. Executive Director and founder of Female Presidents Academy. And of course, most of you might have been harassed during the 2024 election campaign by her posters on every light pole in your neighborhoods as a member of Rise in Zanzi, the National Leadership Collective, as well as the Premier Candidate for Rise in Zanzi in KZN, formally of Rise. I'll say formally because 2024 was the election. You can't necessarily vote for another year, but 2029, Ultimate Fighting Championships are out here, so we don't know. A round of applause for her, please. Testing, 1, 2. Okay. So I gave the mic to Metembe as the focal point in terms of academia and research. Just to get an immediate response from yourself, what's your knee-jerk reaction to the presentation that we have from today? What are some of your thoughts? If you can synthesize them into about 2 to 3 minutes, just in terms of your initial sort of considerations as you think about this data.
Thank you so much, Samantha, and thank you for inviting me. I'd like to say these type of surveys are very insightful. They are very useful, in fact, in just guiding us as a citizen around what citizens in general, or how they perceive democracy, but also how they experience it, because these are obviously two things. While at the same time, I think there is an encouraging way or form of getting these perceptions, and it's actually growing throughout South Africa, because you see a lot more surveys that are now focusing on the perceptions of people. rather than looking at how governments, for example, operate and then the outcomes of government. But there's generally now a need to focus on the insights from people themselves who actually experience that service delivery or democracy. So in saying that, I also think I wouldn't be doing a good service to my comments if I didn't raise my concerns around the methodology used. I think surveys, of course, are quite good. However, sampling also does matter. And having looked at the sampling procedure, I think as an academic, we tend to look at things such as what's the rationality for this? And it also, with our sampling, if you look at 1,006 people in a country with 60 million people, and you go further to divide that into your 9 provinces, you probably have around 178 people per province. KZN, for example, has a population of around 12 million people. If you go deeper, we've got around 54 in the local municipality. So if you divide that 178, you're probably looking at around 3 people, 4 people municipality. If you look at Durban as an example, which has got a population of 4 million, which means you've only looked at 3 people. So I think while we may look at these findings as findings that are worth going through and perusing, but I think we must be on the cautionary side of it to say, is this a representative figure of all South Africans? But yeah, I think I'll also go into the type of questions that are asked. Whether are we able to create a correlation between an effects of democracy and GNU? And this is mainly because with the democracy, what is usually tested are the institutions of democracy. Whether this is your executive, whether this is parliament, whether this is your free media, and so on. And what happens there? That's the execution of any mandate in the Constitution. But other questions are whether the Constitution itself is democratic. Because ultimately, it is created by politicians. They make laws. So one of my concerns would have been, I would have probably wanted to see, even though I do not have the luxury of seeing the actual survey questions, but it would have been important to know how people perceive or how citizens perceive the democratic institutions. How are they operating now?
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. No, we really appreciate that. I think it's a good starting point, and I did that intentionally. As you would know, from Afrobarometer side, the question of methodology is a constant feature of your engagement, and the answer is all of that already, and I appreciate that we'll be engaging on that going forward. Mrs. Nonkululeko from perhaps as a now politician, for a long time, you did a lot of work in civil society, and throughout your campaign, part of what you sort of featuring prominently is that you're not a politician. I guess a lot of messaging from Rise and Zanzi was also similar to that. And so you have a bit of a sense of what public trust and democratic fatigue feels like when you walked into people's homes, when you walked into people's halls and communities. You had a sense of what all of this means. What do you gauge from the data's alignment around democratic fatigue? What's your sense about what these findings reveal about our interpretation of, for instance, fewer than half citizens supporting democracy as the best form of government? What's your sense of all of those things?
Sanbolani, good morning. So firstly, disclaimer, the views I'm about to share are my personal views. And not that of a political party, so that's one. But to also begin by saying I am exhausted. Yeah, I'm getting that out of my system, and I'm not why, because I've been having conversations with people at different times this morning, and then we got this presentation, and then people were like, "Yeah, we thought we were tired. Now we're just done. Can this year wrap up?" But for me, the first thing that stood out from the survey itself is people's perception of democracy. And in response to your questions, Pamandla, a lot of people that we have spoken to over the years in civil society, the dialogues we've hosted in the past 12 years, the conversations we were having on the campaign trail, is that people think democracy is elections. So again, going back to the question Umetembe kind of framed for us is what was, like, after asking whether they trusted democracy or were in favor of democracy, was there a probing as to why they weren't or why they were? Because that's important. Because if people then associate democracy with just the 29th of May, 2024, then that's problematic. But it also then explains why nothing happens in between elections. So that's one. But also from the sample, 18 to 35, there were 43, and that is young people in this country. And we know with the unemployment rates and how unhappy and disengaged young people are, that's a considerable amount in the sample. Followed by the 35 to 55, which again was 43 people, and that is your over 35s who don't then get access to any opportunities, because once you hit 35 in this country, you're not getting learning opportunities, you're not getting invited to any kind of learnerships. You're just completely discarded up until you reach retirement age, which is like more or less your 60s going up. So already having a sample that consists primarily of those two segments already kind of indicates the kind of results that you're going to get. And it would more or less reflect what the country setup is, because that's the proportionate of the population in the country. Less than 50% is under the age of 28 in this country, holistically. And that's young people. And then on top of that, a third of that is people who are between 35 and, your 55 age bracket, which are also disgruntled with the system or democracy per se. So first impressions are that it is representative of the interactions that we've been having for a layer of reasons. And I'm hoping that in as much as we engage and begin to have the Q&A session, we can unpack those, because they range from who are the representatives to how are they selected, to what do they do when they are public representatives. But most importantly, the access of information people have. And sometimes we have these conversations around, politicians are corrupt, young people don't want to vote, people who live in rural parts of the country are disengaged versus those who are in urban. A particular class votes better and has more, but we forget that there's a huge information gap. So if I get nuggets on TikTok, and that's where, as a young person, I'm spending most of my time during the day, and the TikTok says the IEC is corrupt or ABC, I don't get to question that, and there aren't any platforms that then interrogate that or counter videos that are made. So that becomes people's lived realities based on what they're able to consume in nuggets on a day-to-day basis. But I'm really hoping that we can, as we engage and unpack what the survey has resulted in, that we're able to get into the nut and the grit of why people said they weren't happy. Who was saying that? Where do they live? What have they experienced? Because I think there is where we'll be able to then get a sense of how then do we move forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nkululeko. Mr. Balindoli, perhaps if I can talk to the elections and representation and party politics for you. The question of electoral legitimacy came up quite prominently in the survey. Nkululeko as well as Metembe talked about institutional trust weighing quite significantly. And of course, as someone who works at GWC, having attempted to mobilize and successfully accomplish that task of mobilizing voter what's the word, participation, but more so administration, because I think the participation ultimately becomes someone else's choice. What do you say about the aspect of electoral legitimacy, especially because even though the majority of people still support elections as the best way to choose leaders, how does this reconcile with the dissatisfaction in outcomes?
Thank you so much, Samantha. And I think I always look forward to Afrobarometer's surveys because it also gives us an opportunity to see if the work and what we get from the ground is something that is happening across the country. We obviously don't have as big a ability to survey many people, so we do a lot of the people that we work with. And I can say that a lot of this is stuff that we are already seeing as warning signals from the ground already. And Spal, I'll get to your question just now, but I did want to say just a couple of things that I took from this survey that I think should be considered warning signs to all of us, is that it's not just stats. This is the second survey from Afrobarometer that I've seen that has been talking about democratic legitimacy is becoming eroded in our country. Yes, Abantu, they like to have elections, they still believe, they still have the instinct to want to be democratic. But as time is going on since 1994, you can see that more and more Abantu are starting to think, is it really working? Is it what we want? And particularly when it comes to young people, as Nogolego was talking about, they're the ones who show the lowest trust in our democratic institutions. And they're the ones that are most open to a non-democratic regime being able to take over. And we don't have to look very far. We see that this is happening around the world as well. So when you look at places like Brazil and the anger that has happened around corruption, that has almost made people want to go back to an authoritarian regime because at the very least there was stability. So what you often see around the world, and now we're starting to see it in South Africa, is that if we're not going to have democracy that works for us or institutions that we can really rely on, then at least let's have somebody who's going to be strong and can be stable. It's not Shupera, but at least tell Shupera like until whenever. But I don't know what things are going to get better, things are getting better, and then we keep getting commissions and this and bombshells every single day. So I think that's a big reason for why our democratic legitimacy is eroding. Then the second thing that I take from the survey is that it's no longer, particularly with young people, it's no longer that it's a performance failure that's about ideology. It's very seldom much about communism or Marxism. We are in a different era with young voters. They're no longer as ideologically swayed by things. They're more swayed by performance and delivery. And in one part, I think it's interesting because it means that we're moving away from a liberation political movement in our country to more of a governance one. And that in itself is a good thing. But if we don't also have our institutions and our political actors making sure that we can see some sort of deliveries, we will slide back to the other scale. And that dissatisfaction, I think, for me in particular, with young people is a ticking time bomb because then it can go anyway. We've just seen with our neighbors in Kenya, okay, well, our neighbors in Kenya, what happens when the youth is dissatisfied and when they don't believe that their government is actually going to do something? High living costs, the same as us as here in South Africa, eventually get people to start actually wanting to take power into their own hands. And if that means that they burn down institutions or there's chaos, then so be it, because we'd rather everyone is down than some of us are down looking up at a few at least. Same thing with Nepal. You saw them making the finance minister walk in the river. And so we mustn't think that these things are also too far away from us in South Africa and that we're still going to be protected by the idea of 1994 and the institutions. These surveys are showing us clearly that that particular instinct for us to be democratic is one that is slowly eroding. And I think for me, just as the last point, Spa, the GNU then becomes interesting because I also agree with the survey that people are neither really for it or against it. It's still maybe a little bit too soon to say whether it's going to do anything. But I think that this was always going to be the case when you had the result that we had last year, where only 39% of us actually bothered to go out and vote. And then we had this stalemate. If you're going to have a situation where you can't give your executive or your government a clear mandate about what they need to do, you're just going to have people kind of holding on until they see the next election. And I'm very sure from January next year, we'll see the GNU partners start to fight with each other. So I'm very interested what that's going to look like Because if this survey says that people believe that political parties are divisive in the way that they interact with each other, and then we have a local government election where we've got 10 parties that are currently in the cabinet, I think it's going to be chaos, and I look forward to the survey after that election.
Thank you very much. No, good point. And I think perhaps it would be good to hear from each of you what your sense of the GNU is before we hand over to the rest of the room in terms of engaging with yourselves as well as South Africa and Preston regards to the survey. Something that I've been saying consistently, and of course, never mind now. But something that I've been saying consistently is that this we're in a significant challenge in this country. We don't have an opposition at the moment. We're sitting without a real political opposition in the legislature. In the case of that, we don't have an opposition in national parliament, and largely alternate voices think that they can pretend to be a Charlie Kirk or an American form of sort of right-wing, we will occupy the online space, etc., etc. Whereas it's effective to a very small minutia. Cost of data, etc., etc., continue to be barriers to access. But the important part about a lack of opposition is how is it possible to assert legitimate opposition in a parliament where you have all the members of the governing coalition occupy both the executive as well as portfolio committee heads in our provincial legislature. In Gauteng, we have a slightly different situation with the minority government, but even in that instance, that level of legislative participation doesn't seem as vigorous. The only real cause for concern we had, insofar as the pressure that was applied by a party inside the GNU, was through the taxation or no taxation increase at the beginning of the year. And even that was a political ploy, in my view, given I'm saying a panelist. Sorry. So what I want to know is from yourselves, each of you, if you take a minute to say for us, is the GNU structure helping or hindering decisive governance and accountability? And let me start with you, again.
Thank you, sir. I think this is a very interesting question. If you look at the intention of coalition governance, the intention is to ensure that policies that are in place are in check and whether there is proper oversight. But this terrain that we actually find ourselves in is very murky and very much tricky and fun at the same time. Because if you look at the GNU, for example, you've got a lot of parties that have not been in power and have been at the opposition benches. So one political party has been in power. Now, you've now tasted this power. You've now tasted the ministerial position in first. Are you now able to look at the interests of South Africans and say, we are going to challenge this policy, we are going to change this policy, and are you able to conduct your oversight effectively? And I think these are the two questions that we need to ask ourselves. What is the purpose of these institutions? Parliament, the executive. Why are people there? So if you look at a number of examples, whether it's in the province or nationally, a political party have divided positions based on how much you got in the previous election. Therefore, even the formation of cabinets is formed on the basis of this is the percentage of it that I got, so I need 2 people. What if that person is not effective? What happens? Do you go back to say, okay, this person is not effective, president, he's got the prerogative. He removed this person, but he cannot remove this person now because he knows that he's there seated, you can get off at 8 points. So obviously what that means is that the GNU or the governments of provisional unity is now favoring themselves and self-interest as opposed to service delivery. Because if you ask yourself one thing, 2024 was our national provincial elections. With the invention or intervention of a GA or of a coalition government, what national and provincial policy frameworks have changed? We still have the NTP, we still have the provincial growth strategies. What has changed in terms of policy? Nothing. The status quo remains the same.
We have the national dialogue.
Yeah, we have that as well. So I think just two things. Are the coalitions working for South Africans or are they working for each other as individuals? Thank you.
In whose interest are you working? Is it a self-preservation or is it about public interest? Colleagues, either of you?
Thank you, Spat. So I think my fellow panelists has touched a lot on the GNU. And I think from its inception, the GNU was a panic by political parties who had 14 days to put together something that they thought could hold a little bit. And so if you go back even to the charter that they had written at the very beginning about what they said they would do, everyone raised, but what happens? How do you then, if you have a stalemate, how do you break it? What's the deciding voice? How do you go about changing things that you all fundamentally disagree on? And we keep seeing a few of these things coming up, whether it was the Bear or now BEE or land expropriation. But as Matemba says, everyone's just playing cool enough because nobody really wants to lose their position at this particular point. And so again, we're just going to find ourselves in a situation where this just becomes a tool for keeping stability for the sake of it, but no progression, and certainly not for the 8 million young people who are waiting for some kind of employment opportunities or economic policies that are going to take them forward. So from the get-go, I think the way that it was constructed in their charter was it was never going to become anything that had real muscle. And the only opposition that you have in the GNU is really utilized by ministers who have such small parties and one or two positions that they can afford to almost be crazy the things that they say. And so this is where you start having things about the Gatons, the racial stoking that we've seen happening, anti-foreigners, sort of sentiments that becomes now the next big thing. And for them, that's how they're positioning themselves as saying, yes, we're in the GNU, but we're here for you. You see how we're still so agitated on these things. But then why don't they leave if they are so upset about these things? I think that ANC actually missed a real opportunity by having actually done the GNU in a different way, which was to be a confidence voting, and then having to work, whether it was for the budget or whatever things they wanted to pass, to say, we only have 40%, we'll form a minority government, and as and when we can agree with partners, because that would have made everyone a little bit more mature in the way that they would have then come to the table about things. But this thing where anyone and everyone's now got blue lights, they're very excited. If you look at how many of our ministers have actually been out of the country, some of them, especially the deputy ones, are actually rivaling, surpassing what ministers from the last administration done. And we've already been in this administration for 1 year. That's how often these people are now peshe because Umnandi and they don't know when the thing is going to end. Yeah. I think they're all terrified it's going to end next year because they're going to be fighting so much. So I'm worried that, to Pa's point, that we don't have a credible opposition, and the only opposition comes from within, and it's not even that strong. It's really about stoking and keeping their own part in it. What I do think are two interesting things that we should all be looking out for is this municipal structures act. Yeah. It was put into Parliament when the DA was very convinced that they would have a different space in this election. Now, no one's quite sure if anyone really wants to push it, but if they do, the only winners as it stands currently would be the two biggest parties. Almost, I think, 11 other parties would be wiped out because one of the things that they want is the thresholds. Whether or not we're going to have a conversation in this country about whether it's democratic or not before the next government elections, again, remains to be seen. And also the people that are going to be voting on this in Parliament are the people that are in Parliament to stand to gain the most from it anyway. So yes, we can go to public meetings and we can let people know what we believe, but ultimately our public representatives are going to make that decision. And I don't think we've got the muscle yet in South Africans to really push them when they're not accountable to us. So we might come next year and have a completely different view of what this country looks like because we've got this law. And then the last one is the electoral reform. That will only come in effect for 2029. But same thing. The people that are going to make the next rules about how we vote, whether we have constituencies, whether we have new demarcations of how MPs are allocated, are the people that are there now. And I don't think at the moment they are significantly democratically mature enough to vote in the interest of all of us South Africans versus voting for their own party political affiliations. And that scares me more because it just means that we open up more and more, as you've seen in the survey, the room for people to become disengaged with the system. Because why would I care about a parliament that is supposed to do something and I go ask and I vote, but the same people that I'm voting for will do something different to what I actually want. And we haven't, I think, figured out enough how to do that carrot and stick as citizens against our political parties outside of just voting. And until we crack that, I worry that the next time we come to this, we're going to say citizens of 70% dissatisfied. And then next thing you know, we've got, a Donald Trump on our hands.
The Moonshot Act colleagues, they did a study, supposed study visit to Germany last year, or in the campaign season. And if you see the politics of Germany at the moment and how precarious the coalitions are currently, you have France, the French Prime Minister. He's in a really tight corner at the moment with the vote of no confidence in the people that have been deploying as the president of the country, because their system works differently. The prime minister essentially appoints the president, but the presidents have not been gaining any real favor in that parliament. Even coalitions are not a thing to play with, and it seems, as you say, the panic button, they didn't take it seriously, even ahead in terms of the potential electoral outcomes. And so those are significant challenges. Support yourself. And then, colleagues, I'd like to ask you to prepare to ask your question, share your thoughts so that we can engage going forward. Yes, ma'am.
So on the one end, we may say that it's too early to judge the effectiveness of the GNU. But on the other hand, I think we would be quite valid in saying it's behaving exactly the way we thought it would. And if we backtrack around even before the formation of the GNU, every single political party was out, policy propositions, their campaigns were out in full force. Some went as far as saying we would never, under any circumstance, work with the ANC. There were promises. There were promises that were made. People sat in political debates and acclaimed certain positions. And then we voted on the 29th of May. And then there was the time period where we weren't knowing what is happening. We knew there were conversations that were happening between political parties. We knew that this was the first time we had gotten a result such as this. But the people who had voted for the political parties weren't clued in terms of how far are the conversations developing. And I say this because if I were to ask by a show of hands, from the political leaders and the political leaders you had engaged in prior to the elections to the 29th of May happening, how many of them or how many of the political party leaders came back and explained that this is the pickle we're in? These are the discussions. I know I said I hated the ANC and never work with them. But this is the political moment and this is what it requires. Because again, there's this assumption that you mustn't engage with the electorate because they won't understand. And the truth is that if you just explain and become honest with people, chances are they will have a better understanding in trying to explain why you took the decisions that you took. So jiggy, we have this GNU. And part of how the GNU also worked is that they didn't all sit in one room. The conversations didn't happen in one room. So you had the ANC interacting with the EFF, you had the ANC interacting with the DA, with the PA, with the IFP. So they don't all really know who signed what with who. So then being able to work together in any form gets put out the window. Then being able to collude and try and push for certain policy positions kind of gets set aside because now I'm going to push for this. And I know what I said to the ANC leaders. Therefore, this goes against what we said we would do. And again, it's like the DA kind of fighting with the ANC as though they're not part and parcel of government, again, they still take their individual stances and they will still be campaigning leading up to 2026 on their individual campaigns, but they are also in the GNU. We were held at ransom as a country when the budget, and it was a conversation. And even then, nobody came back and said, oh, by the way, this is what we are arguing. These are the kind of the open conversations that are happening. And this is how then it affects anything that happens moving forward. So as a country, we're sitting there having them bicker and kind of, kind of threaten each other. If you don't do this, then we're pulling out. Nobody ever pulls out because, because they know what we agreed on. So there are always these threats. We're going to pull out, we're going to pull out. Nobody ever pulls out. But the same people who said we had a chunky and a bulky parliament and a cabinet are still comfortably there with their deputy ministers and deputy ministers. And then we wonder why people don't trust democracy and don't trust the GNU as though we're shocked. But they also behave this way because we're not going to do anything about it. So can I end it there?
Thank you so much. It is unfortunate that you ended at the point where you say you're not going to do anything about it, but I hope you'll have another opportunity to change that. Of course, I'd like to invite some hands from the room. Please do raise your hand and we'll get the mic over to you. As we send the mic to you, please introduce yourself. If you come from a political party, let us know. If you come from a university, please let us know. If you come from civil society, please let us know where it's at. Just a question or a comment, in order to try and make it effective for everyone to be able to contribute, please can you keep it as brief and concise as possible. One, two, three. Those three hands for now. Mike. So one, two, three. Yeah. Collect.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the exciting presentations. My name is Siabulela. I am the coordinator for the Center for Black Thought and African Studies at the CFMPT Methodist Seminary in America. It's quite scary when you're listening to the presentation by something earlier on. It's quite scary because what it essentially says is that we've got a major chunk of our population is youth. A major chunk of that is saying democracy is not working for us. And within that, there's a willingness, or at least a flirting with the idea of other forms of governance. That for me is like, it is a soup made out of pretty much TNT. All you need is a spark and things will go flying. Now, the question I really have generally about the barometer in terms of the survey is there any sense of a way in which citizens prefer or sort of alternative forms of governance that we can elicit from the survey? And I think that was specifically for Asabela. But just something to reflect on in terms of the entire panel, from the panelists, is how will the GNU shape the local government elections in the coming year? Precisely given the fact that local governance is generally the interface between citizens and its form of governance. Our most exposure to government is local, usually in the local format. And so how will the politics and the moving and shaking of the GNU, fragile as it is, play out in the context of local government municipalities that are always shaky terrain, even when there's one political party in government?
So a question for yourself in terms of, are there alternative governance systems that are being considered? And of course, for the panel also consider the second half. And perhaps Preston, you will handle the question from Meta and there about the methodology and the movement go to it. Small.
Thanks, Fran. My name is Musi Soshedeng, I'm just a civilian. Thanks for. Not from a political party or an agency or a grouping of any form, and just.
Citizens matter too.
Yes. Thank you for legitimizing. From the comments that were made by the panel regarding the GNU, there's something that protects them in what a democracy, South African type of democracy is. That's that clause called proportional representation. So how they're operating as a 20% party versus a 40 versus a 1%, they all vary based on these are the outcomes, this is what legitimizes. It's just it's a piece of paper. And the frustrations that were presented by Asafiga and the data that's coming out of it is that people are frankly in disbelief. We've got the most educated society in history, but unemployment is so high. The changes in attitudes and perception, and something touched on in one of the responses as well was, what do you know anyway? And why the political parties never report that to people, because they believe that why stupid will just take what they say. With the statistics, the data that has been reported, and today being a significant day, or was it yesterday, that 900,000 matriculants are writing. That's 900,000 people as of 1 January 2026 who will be unemployed, in addition to the unemployment we've already got and the retrenchments that are currently happening with some of the big multinational companies, which adds more foot soldiers to a revolution that won't be democratic. So how far do we believe that is from occurring? And something we don't like to touch on as South Africans because of the notion of rainbow nation is race. Your race informs your daily lived experience. And that's why whenever a discussion is hosted by whichever agency, whichever grouping, this is the representation in KZN. You can see who's missing. It's obvious to avert to. And that same grouping of people that is not representing themselves in platforms like this, where it's just a discussion, it's not offensive and it's not threatening, believes that we are so far away from there being a violent revolution. There's a person who extolled Charlie Kirk, a South African businessman, and I was speaking to Mbali about it during the tea break, when he was challenged by JJ Tabane on a panel, who's a professor who consumes a lot of data. That person used expletives and said, try me. That's the attitude of people who don't represent themselves, who don't present themselves at conversations like this. And it's the belief that South Africa will never, we are so far from a revolution that will happen that is not democratic. It's a violent takeover. It seems like from the data as well that you presented, we are not far from that happening at all.
Thank you very much. You know what the thing is? They are organized. They are perhaps more organized than we think, we assume that they are. July 2021 proved a lot of that for us. Who some of us who thought we were just because of the cars we drive. Then going to a spa became a political matter. You had to present your bona fides that you live here, where you're from. All of that became quickly institutionalized, and that was a warning for us who are in the developmental space, the democracy space. about the alternative for what is possible. Of course, we have someone from the political party space who wants to engage on this question in particular. And perhaps the other question about how far away are we? The 6th of July, we are still a lot closer to that moment, the 6th of July 2025, when you know what happened and what is happening at the moment.
Greetings, each and every one of us in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I am Melissa Ibaya from the African Christian Democratic Party. Thank you so much, Afrobarometer, for the stats that you all have presented. It's very, very alarming. But my question is, can we please have a copy of that to take back with us? Going back to the GNU, is it been affected? We look back, I think it's no surprise to us that the GNU would be possible in South Africa, because going back to 2021, at the Ethekwini municipality, most of the political parties, yet they complained about the ANC, but they all voted for the ANC to be in power of Ethekwini. And we wonder why service delivery gets even worse. It's because the political parties that were supposed to be against the ANC went through them and put them back into power. I think the only two parties that did not vote for the ANC to be in power was the ACDP and the DA. And then again, you look at the DA letting the people down by going into the GNU, because people thought that the DA would be the one that is opposing the ANC, but not together with them. And if we look at what has been happening, if you look at millions that have been approved to inject chicken, millions of that, those millions of them. And then you look at monies that were found under there. You look at political parties and individuals that have criminal charges, that have had criminal charges, that can still become leaders of the country. You look at political parties that incite hate speech and violence. It can still be in the nation. How is this working in South Africa? What leaders have we voted for to act on our behalf? And we wonder why everything is crumbling. We wonder why South Africa is in the state that it is in. And if you look at the unemployment rate, why is the unemployment rate so low? Because of the behavior of these political parties and individuals that companies that invest in South Africa are pulling out. They're closing down, businesses are closed down. So many. And that's the reason why there is no job opportunities for our youth and even for all of our middle-aged and old people. Because in South Africa anymore. There's no hope for people in South Africa. And you look at our doctors and teachers and our education. You look at all of these people that have left South Africa. Why have they left South Africa? These are the people that we need in South Africa. But they've left.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the country, the state that our country is in, it's sad. It's sad that the people have allowed our country to become what it is because we put the wrong people in power. And people that have the GNU, everybody in the GNU, I think there's a whole can of worms that has been opened. And if you look at these people in the GNU, they're not there for the people. If they were there for the people, they wouldn't go in. And they wouldn't become one with the ruling party. Now, by going in, you become one with the ruling party. And many of the people would say, you went there because we wanted to be the light there. You can't be the light because you want to be darkness. And you look at all of these things that are happening. How have these people that went into the GNU fighting for us as individuals, have we seen any change? Have we seen positive results? No, we have not. This is the start worse. And more of these criminal behaviors have been exposed because everybody was looking for what they could gain. Not about the country, not about seeing the people prosper, not about creating more jobs for our people and our youth. And we look at poverty. Poverty is escalated to a whole other level.
Yeah.
Why? Because our politicians that are in power have let us down. And it's time us as individuals really think this out. and do something different for the next election to come.
Yeah.
Not think about ourselves, but think about how we can have an impact in our community and raising up our youth that can have a purpose rather than TikTok and all of the social media.
I'll about to agree with you that the TikTok. Okay. Though I myself am not a member of the Gen Zs, I've seen TikTok become a very effective tool for mobilizing and catalyzing right social change that you want to see. I'm on Instagram, but I post 3 times a year. I'm a seasonal social media user. One last hand for this one, and then we'll have our panelists as well as Afrobarometer respond to engage.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. And to the panel, my name is Kamala Thomas. I'm from the Africa Restoration Alliance and Earth Angels, which is a NPO, but we're very citizen engaged. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm so glad that I've never missed an Afrobarometer feedback every year, and I'm so glad for this year's one. However, as soon as I heard the word leak, it flooded my head. And I was like, oh my God. So yeah, it's very, very bleak feedback, which is very sad in a way. But given that, you also took me back to previous engagements on platforms like this. And few things I want to highlight is that, when we had the engagement of coalitions, way before coalitions came to be, DDP hosted a lot of coalition workshops. And we all engaged in that and we all spoke about it. And I remember me also saying that I was looking at this idea of having a cabinet representative of all the political parties that have won in the elections. So the leaders of those parties sit in a cabinet and run the government. That was my idea that I put forward as a coalition government because we knew what the ruling party wasn't working. But if you have representatives from all the different political parties that have won in an election, obviously a free and fair election, to the real word of free and fair, not what we have in South Africa, it would seem like then they would hold each other accountable in terms of governing South Africa. But when the GNU came about, I don't think that was what was happening. Because when you look at now, from last to now, 6 months, 8 months, 8 to 10 months, from every political party that is part of the GNU that has a minister's portfolio, all they promote is just their party and highlight what they are doing. It's as if that if they went there, nothing else would have happened. Instead of saying, this is the portfolio we have, these are the policies we have now, we push this forward to the benefit of the people, they are now promoting themselves in those positions, instead of putting forward policies that benefits all citizens. And this is not just happening on government national level. We don't hear anything from province. Provincial is like gone, ghost, zero, none, null and void. Forget it, it's a minus. And yesterday I had a conversation with a foreigner, okay? And the alarming thing she said to me, if we were to vote, Malema was going to be president. And she said it, point blank, like, this is it. And I asked her, I said, why do you say that? She says, no, we want him. And so when I started telling her about all the things that this is who the real Malema is, and this, she was like, really? We didn't know that, but we were brought into this country to make him become president. So, this is becoming such a diverse thing. And then she started speaking about
Yeah. Don't even go there.
So, one of the panelists is from my area.
Yeah.
So when we stayed in our meeting, my goal coming from the DDP meetings was to become an active citizen. was to bring about change. I looked at our ward, our area, as the first multicultural area. And seriously, our area became the first multicultural area. It was the first, after the group areas that was removed, you know, Indians came in, blacks came in, and the whites went out. I still,
Diversification, that's how it works. That's when it moves up to make space for the others.
and the whites that moved out, we had a group, seriously, an international group. Most of them went to Australia.
Yeah.
So we had ex-residents of Woodlands living in Australia. And we stayed in contact with all these people that left the area. Now we living in their houses.
Yeah.
The area, and they were sharing things about how they live and stuff. So I have made this, and you know, Brian, I grew up in school. DDP made me who I am today. And I practiced everything that Dr. Rama taught us, everything that we did, everything that we had in every coalition in our ward, in our area, to make sure that the people understand, know.
Yeah.
But you know, when I listened to this person yesterday from our area, I was shocked. And then coming from our last by-election that was a total knockoff, I knew for a fact that it was going to go a different way.
Yeah.
But in the 11th hour, like about half an hour before the election, something changed.
Yeah.
Where did that result come from? And so I went directly to the head and I said, when I came to sign on that ballot paper, I brought this to your attention. Your word there said to me already who was going to win. On the day of election, I knew who was not going to win. And then suddenly you all made it happen for it to win. So coming back to the barometer, can you please do a survey on an alternative government? What does the people say? What do they want?
Yeah.
What do the people want? And I think that is something we need to hear because people didn't go to vote. I know a lot of people went to vote and they spoiled their ballot deliberately. The intimidation, I'm going to call it intimidation by the other bigger parties, actually went against them
100%.
because they bused in people from all over. Like there was more of their membership there than votes that came in.
More of the
And that-
provincial membership, yeah.
That deterred the actual people that were supposed to go and vote. So there was more people out of the resident than in the resident. So these are things that we want to hear what the citizens say. What do they want?
Thank you.
What are they telling us as politicians so that we can now say, we've heard you and now we want to do this.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for those questions and comments. I'll of yours to yourself. I'll now like to invite firstly Stetson and then Africa to respond firstly to the question of methodology and then secondly to the alternative government, if that's the question that you have on the survey, and potentially what people are saying in response to that. And of course, our panelists can get ready to respond to the broader questions that arose from the question. Stetson, yes, you can use that one. Thank you very much, Tad.
Good morning again, colleagues. Thank you. The question on sampling methodology is not a new question for us. We hear in almost every presentation we do across the various stakeholders we speak to, right? Whether it's a donor or political agency or a government institution, we hear the same sort of concern around Afrobarometer methodology, right? Just want to say up front, right, that thank you for the question. We hear the concern. However, I must allude to the fact that we don't have the funding to conduct a census, right, and then enumerate every single citizen in the country, right? But what we do is we employ a sampling methodology called PPPS, which is population proportion to size sampling, right? Using a random stratification method. Now, it is a statistical technique that we use, right, to ensure that the sample we choose, right, has direct proportional representation, right, to the population in the country. So we use census data, right, to inform how the 1,600 respondents are collected geographically, right, so by province, as Muteba mentioned, but also with this urban-rural splits, right, And thirdly, we use a gender quota of 50-50, right? 50% male, 40% female. So that's how we get to the 1,600. Now I want to say, like, so the question you may ask is, so is this a robust sample? Is it really representative of what the nation is saying, right? We conducted a pre-election and post-election survey, telephone survey, just prior to the elections in May, right? And we predicted the results less 2 percentage points, right, for the one it actually was, right? So I'm going to just allude to the fact that the techniques we use are very robust. They're very rigorous, right? They meet international standards, right, for opinion polling, not only in South Africa, not only on the continent, but also beyond the borders of the continent. I just want to maybe highlight with one illustration how effective the sample is, right? If you were to do this survey again 100 times in South Africa between June and July 2025, right? We are saying that 95 out of the 100 times you'll get the exact same results, plus minus 2 percentage points on either side, right? That's how confident we are that the results are valid. So if you had to conduct the survey again in June, July, 100 times, we say that 95% of the time, 95 times, you'll get almost the exact same results. Sampling, to sort of bring another illustration, is like tasting a pot of food that you cooked, right? How do you test if the salt is right? You don't eat the whole pot to say, okay, fine, the salt is right. You just put a teaspoon in it, right? Knowing that you'll get a good representation of what exactly is in the pot before you serve it. And so that's sort of a very basic illustration of what sampling is and the measures we go through to ensure that our sampling is as robust as it can be. Given there are limitations, right? With all opinion polls surveys, there are limitations. So we're not denying that there may be limitations in the work we're producing. But our argument is that we try our level best to ensure that it is as representative as possible. And then secondly, just to add another caveat to that, when it comes to opinion polling on the continent, there is really no other option. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatima. You're welcome to come to the podium. Use the podium mic, it's yours.
And noted. All right, thanks so much for the question. I want to make clear that the question we pose to our respondents is not a specific question about what they want. So we give them 3 options. So one is, to me, democracy is preferable. And in 2025, 49% of citizens chose that option. And then 29% say that for them, it doesn't matter what kind of system they have. And 22% said that sometimes a non-democratic government is preferable. So in our last survey in 2022, what was striking to us was a finding around whether citizens would be willing to take a non-democratic leader if that leader would deliver jobs, housing, and get rid of crime. And there we found that about 7 in 10 of citizens say that they would take that option. So taken together, that finding in 2022 with the findings that we presented here, I think it really does signal alarm bells for South Africa's future. And I want to piggyback off of what Mbadi said earlier about us being careful of the South African exceptionalism, thinking that certain things won't happen to us. We've seen Gen Z protests erupt in Kenya. We've seen it in Morocco. The most recent case was the coup in Madagascar, which was precipitated by Gen Z protests again. And so I think we really need to take these findings seriously, and for all of us, not just the politicians in the room, civil society leaders, church leaders, community leaders. It just, really emphasizes that we need to do more work. We have a long way to go to get things right. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fika, and thank you for all your responses. Colleagues, who would like to first bite at the apple? Are you pointing to the good level?
Crazy. So perhaps because, people in general, citizens don't get insight into how political parties craft campaigns and messaging, I think that would be a good space just to touch on what Pops said about wanting to find out what people want versus what they get. So there are months and months that political parties spend on the ground, in communities, asking questions such as, what do you think of a particular leader? What are the issues you face in your community? From these issues, what are your top 3? All the way down to their slogans. They draft tons and tons of slogans, and they go in focus groups and they present these slogans, and people say, oh, this is catchy. In our instance, it was the "We Need New Leaders" that came out as the one people responded to at the time. So that was the slogan that people got introduced to. But beyond that, what political parties also look for is campaign nuggets. So depending on the issues that come out, we probe more. If people say unemployment is an issue, there are a series of questions that get asked. What is it about employment? And then eventually you get to a point where, okay, people say we're hungry. We need to work because we're hungry. So that's an entire process that takes a very long time that has probably started in preparation for 2026 local elections. So anything that you see being campaigned by political parties is what has come out and what they have gotten out of the constituency, particularly for smaller parties who don't have a lot of resources. For bigger parties, they have numbers, they have emails, they know exactly who their people are. So chances of doing that are very minimal because they know it's either you are targeting a crowd that wants to protect the life they have, so the benefits, the luxury, all of those things, or you're targeting people who fear for their lives and losing their lives. And those are two completely different things. But what happens is that you have an instance in Cape Town where there was an uproar around the Israel-Palestine issue. Multiple groups, social movements were out in the streets, absolutely upset at the DA's position at the time. And the elections came, and the DA retained power. Right? You have young people who had multiple parties come to them and give them tangible ideas around what we're going to do to create jobs, how long this is going to take, being honest around what was needed, and have the same young people vote for a party who said they were going to send pregnant young people to Robben Island. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a disconnect at community level between what is a social issue and what is a political issue. So I could say, people said to me, and we knocked on 100 or 1,000 doors, and we were greeted by single mothers, then proceed to draft legislation and policy positions that address the issues and be able to alleviate the pressures of single mothers, and have the same single mothers vote for a man who couldn't care less about them and their kids. And these are the things that we must speak about when we speak about how people interact and react and perceive democracy to be, because these are real life things. We participated in a by-election not so long ago, same word as Pops, and we probably had about 15 community WhatsApp groups. I can assure you that these conversations about the state of the country don't happen in those WhatsApp groups, even in the build-up of a by-election.
I can assure you that when you enter that group and you read the rules, in capital letters, it is written no politics. In the WhatsApp groups that are meant to convene, engage, discuss critical issues that happen at ward level, within the top 3 rules of the group, there will be no politics, not in small print, in capital letters. Because this is not, then where should we discuss politics? We have organizations, civil society, who say they are apolitical. Yeah. Who say they're apolitical, but we do political work, right? So there has to be conversations. Yes, this is not working for us, but in the spaces that we occupy, how much of politics are we actually talking about? And how then do we relay and message this? Because that's also important. It's not enough to say young people are not interested. Why? You called them into a community hall by the very same councillor who doesn't live in that ward, and you were shocked that they didn't turn up. So I heard somebody say it's a ticking time bomb. Things are going to go, burn away if we don't do something about it. And perhaps, which is why I did the disclaimer to say, don't quote me on this. This is not the views of my political party. But if you are not, or we are not willing to do anything, then what if it burns away? Because clearly, it's just another thing. These conversations are almost like side hustles. We do this between 9 to 5 and then retreat to our own homes. And then lastly, in this by-election that we participated in, we had obviously a diverse kind of ward. We had the whites, like Pops said, but for the last 15 years, the ward was held by a DA councillor. And we have different areas of the ward, from Yellowwood Parks, Woodlands, Woodhavens, Montclair, all the way down. And for the past 15 years, the focus was only in Yellowwood Park. And the assumption was that if we took somebody who then did work across these other areas, even outside of Yellowwood Park, took somebody who was in the CPF, took somebody who had raised some of our kids because she has an ECD center in the ward, took somebody who patrols our community when we are asleep because she's chairperson of the CPF, then surely, and was previously DA, then surely we would get people out to vote and we could be able to change the trajectory of the ward. There was a 25% outcome, people who came out to vote. Turnout. 25%. There are 20,000 plus people who are registered to vote, but only 5,000 and some change came out. So it's not black and white, which is why these conversations can't be limited to Afrobarometer and BDP hosting us here, because the issue is no longer who the leader is, but it's far deeper and far complex than we understand it to be.
Thank you very much, Matemba, and then Mbali. Yeah, you see now. But maybe you guys will bring lights to the conversation. You won't let it burn.
Thank you, Star. I think there was something around the influence of the GNU and the youth on the local election. It's very interesting, because you're starting to see politicians in the national legislature, in the provincial legislature, starting to have these fights amongst each other. And the fights amongst each other now are pushing narratives in the locals. Because what we have to look at is that while the GNU or the PA or the GPU exists, those people want to come back in 2029. So what happens now is that you start to see in KZN, for example, the DA is starting to have issues, or the ANC or the MK has issues with the MEC. It is around a matter in a certain municipality. And that matter is around who needs to govern. Is it the ANC? Is it the IFP, the DA? So now these coalitions are going deeper into the locals who are their agency for coming back. So what they're going to do now is that they're going to push for certain people that appear to be stronger in certain areas. For example, if you've got someone who's the leader in the ANC and is quite strong in the Musa area, the Richards Bay area. So what you're going to do now, you're going to start pushing them out so that the people that vote for him and his faction are no longer in power. Because those are the same people that are going to use the same state resources through the municipalities to fund those campaigns. Because campaigning is a very big thing. And it's even very concerning in integrity, for example, where most of the budget is obviously found at the municipality. So whoever is likely to win the municipality next year will be, and this is very sad to say, it is through the people in the municipality who actually support people that will get the large tenders and through politicians. If he gets a 50 million rand tender, he's going to fund the party using that. So we're just seeing that interface between the provincial governments having enough influence in order to prepare their own piggy bank one day. And if you also look at the national government, you've got the issue of Gates and McKenzie, who had an issue that Kenny Muneni was taken out of that portfolio committee. So these guys are like, okay, we need to have at least, or reach at least a threshold in the city. In order for us to do that, we need to be visible. We need to be visible through our political persons. If you remove him, you are now taking away that visibility for us as a party. Therefore, we are threatening to pull out because what you're saying is that we are now not going to be able to electioneer because we don't have people. So while the national and the provincial governance of unity may seem very far, but they are gathering in very local areas. And you may find that a person that ends up being mayor is someone that has been supporting from the top. So it creates another problem around whether local elections are going to be a bottom-up approach or a top-down approach. Because you start hearing the provincial committee has said, this is the person that we want. And this has been a very thorny issue around community, where the people want this councillor, and there's an instruction. And if you look closely, who's supporting this councillor that has been suggested, it is people that are in the provincial government. So yeah, it's a very interesting terrain that we actually find ourselves in terms of the influence. But this is, of course, what happens in preparation for national elections. We've just completed national elections, but people are already preparing for national elections. So they're preparing through the local elections.
Yeah.
You see, so yeah, I think also with the legitimacy around elections, it's really concerning to actually see the concerns. And if we go back to what happened in July 2021, you can actually tell that people are ready for anything. They're ready to loot. You actually found people that have jobs that were looting. You had people that are unemployed that were looting, and people that were saying, okay, I have a job, I'm fine, but I don't think this is the democracy that I signed up for. Therefore, if there's no oversight that is being played by the GNU, there's no accountability, there's no land, for example, the conversation around land reform is now moot. What will happen to land? Because this land issue is a key question that has not been responded to, and people have not forgotten it.
Yeah.
So eventually, if you compound all these things, you find people that are getting ideas through TikTok, for example. Because previously you had Twitter, you had Facebook, and you could not transmit so much information and data. Today, people could just sit down and say, you saw what happened in Madagascar. Yeah, let's do it. And there you go. If you take a trail through how that July 2021 thing happened, it was mostly conversations that were had on WhatsApp. So imagine now you've got TikTok And people are seeing these things. Young people are seeing these things. Young people are unemployed. If we speak about the matriculants who are going to be unemployed next year, those people have nothing to lose. And I mean, it makes sense for them. I've got nothing to lose. Whether I go to jail, I'm going to starve anyway if I'm out. If I'm inside, at least, I'm going to have that 15,000 a day or whatever. But generally, young people are just fed up of the institutions that democracy or this democracy has provided to them. There's no oversight, there's no accountability, but there are institutions that exist. But do they work? Partly, they need to improve.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mali, please bring some light.
I just wanted to
Was this black coordinated between the two of you also? You're in mourning, the same as the country.
I wanted to just answer two questions and then just give my final comments. The one actually first to Afrobarometer, I think it would be great if you also did one of those surveys that you've done before where you also show the trust in institutions. I remember the last one that you had, political parties, opposition parties were at the very bottom. And then sort of you had a little bit of this, the police, healthcare, being a bit further. I'd be very interested now, especially with the Panazi saga that's happened, to see where that would fall. Only because I think if these results are telling us that people would want a strong leader, slightly with a military undertone. He said he wouldn't run. But I think that he's so beloved, at least in this particular time and space, that it would be a very interesting thing to even just poll, because I think he's a direct, almost example right now that you could say, okay, clearly the rest have not, shrouded themselves in glory, but here's one who's seeming like a Bantanda. If there was ever a chance in South Africa that this would happen, maybe that's you always thought, but just as an interesting, I guess we'll see. Yeah. And how will the GNU politics inform LGE? I think the tip has said quite a lot, but I also think, like I said, now that we're moving away from e-governance, sort of liberation politics, and also because people are diverse in where they live now, people are so desperate that, you have people in Durban North crying, like I was hearing today in East Coast Radio about having no water for 1 week. I mean, I know that's nothing for businesses, but for them, that's a big thing. They're like, even my Jojo tank doesn't have water. In fact, the big conversation on East Coast Radio today was a couple calling in to ask, are they bad people because they don't want to let their neighbor sometimes use their Jojo tank even though the neighbor has a little baby? And this became a big question now. And I mean, my thought process was, this has just been going on for 1 week. And it's not even that you don't have water the whole day, it's just intermittent versus the rest of KZN what the water situation looks like. But so the purpose of this is that East Coast Radio doesn't even talk about politics generally. But now, because of the state of the failure of service delivery, just on a whole scale level everywhere, even people who typically are like, I don't want to talk about politics, are now wanting to talk about politics if it's directly affecting them. Who would have thought I wouldn't have water, is basically what they say. And so I think that the GNU, in terms of the next LGE, isn't going to have an effect in terms of the way it's constituted. But what you are going to see is people are going to say, I don't like maybe the DA generally, but at least the corner puts me on a WhatsApp. That's how low our bar has become. And so you'll have people holding their noses about not liking the ideology of a particular political party, let's say, but being like, at the very least, somebody here is answering me when I ask the question. And notoriously...
Yeah, someone is trying to get an FM radio station as you're speaking. Carry on.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was so I think that's where we're going to see local governments. The problem now is, in case it didn't again, we're different in the way our municipal leadership structure is to the rest of the country. So in the rest of the country, they'll fight the LGE, the proportional representation system comes in here, but they have mayoral executives. So that's how they govern. Whereas here in KZN, and you guys have seen it, you have